Welcome everyone to Agile Professionals. We are sponsored, thank you to REI Systems. REI Systems, we're a software development company, IT consulting company. We've been working here for almost 20 years, 20 years or so. We work mostly for the federal government, and we also have products for state governments. We are just got awarded top workplace in the DC area by the Washington Post, and we are hiring. So check us out at our website. Today we have a really special speaker. I got to know her at I think it was before the Business Agility Conference. She Lisa is a coach at Excella, an Agile coach at Excella, working as a Scrum Master, and she has a lot of experience working as a Scrum Master for federal government clients, and she also has a background in psychology and cognitive science, which is very interesting to me. I think that we'll get into it a little bit there, and she has experience with instructional design, and really, what I like about her is that when it comes to learning and understanding how people learn, I think she has a lot to explain on that front. And she's also one of the co-organizers of the DC Women in Agile meetup, which is an awesome meetup. They had Lisa Adkins join their last meetup, famous Agile coach, and really really exciting.
Chromosomes can show up.
Yeah. Okay.
There was one male.
There was
showed up.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
We talk about a lot of issues relevant to women, but men
Yeah.
are more than welcome to show up. Absolutely.
So without further ado, let me welcome Lisa on the stage, and she will be talking about her talk right now. Let's give her a hand.
All right, let's switch laptops here.
Yep.
So while I'm doing this, let me just say that I was very flattered to hear you say that I have a background in cognitive science. Actually, my degree is in education, and I love cognitive science, and I read a lot as a layperson. And as far as psychology, I also read a lot on all of that, but this is interesting. Why is it showing the slide halfway? Let me see if I can figure out what's going on. Oops, didn't even open Slack. Apologize, I had this all queued up, and then I saw the deer, and I'm like, that's there we go. All right, it's a little better. I'm also really interested in psychology, but mostly from the perspective, or my experience with it is mostly as an instructional designer, because when you're putting together learning materials and training materials, you need to understand how people absorb information and how they learn and how their brains work, so that you can help them better to learn the materials you're teaching them, or whatever it is you're doing with them. And so I've read a lot in that area, and it fascinates me. And so I put together this talk to share some of my love of this whole subject area. So tonight you'll be experiencing some videos and activities, and we'll do some small group work, and I hope it's going to be fun. It's supposed to be fun, and I hope it is. So I'll just tell you a little more about me. I'm honored to be on the leadership team with an organization called the Agile Leadership Institute. And as Matthias said, I helped to organize the DC WIA, Women in Agile meetup. And I'm helping to plan a business agility conference for government in November. The Business Agility Institute is an international institute devoted to supporting and promoting business agility, and they run conferences, and I've been to a few of them. And now they're branching out and having focused conferences on different topics, and this one's going to be on government agility. Right now, I'm a Scrum Master for a project with USCIS, and just so you know, I came at Agile, I think I told one or two of you about this earlier, that I was an instructional designer working for the VA, and it fell to me to build these courses on Agile. Essentially, the government didn't want to keep paying people like Excella all this money to go to Scrum Master classes and get certification, because the government didn't really care about certification. They just want people to learn how to do it. So they got a bunch of training experts together and asked them to put together a course on being a Scrum Master, being a product owner, and sort of advanced product ownership, you know, how to basically determine whether or not your contractors are actually using Agile properly and all that kind of thing. And I loved it so much that I was like, I want to do that. I mean, I really liked my job, but, and so then my next job was at the Homeland Security Acquisition Institute, where I led a team that was responsible for the program and project management curriculum at DHS for all the program and project managers across the department. And that's where I met Dave, who was also working at DHS. And that was really fun. It was challenging to have a really agile effort within a larger waterfall environment. That was very challenging. So we made it work, and I'm very proud to say that team is still going, and they're still using Agile and Scrum. But now I'm able to be Agile all the time, and it's really fun. Very challenging in the federal space. So, you know, as you can tell from my description of my background, I've done a wide variety of things. And the principles and the ideas that I'm going to be helping you understand tonight apply in every setting I've been in. They apply anywhere, really. And they're very powerful. And so it doesn't matter if you're interested in Agile or not, or what your background is, or what your future aspirations are. I think you'll still find this stuff really fun. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here is watch a little video. And I'd like everyone to to be very quiet. Okay. Please raise your hand if you have seen this video. Okay, great. All right, thanks. 2 people. That's about what I expected. So I would request that those 2 people be very quiet during the next activity. Okay, in order for everyone here to get the benefit of this experience, it's important that you watch the video in silence. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch a really short video. It's 30 seconds long. And you'll see 2 groups of people passing a basketball back and forth. There's 3 people wearing white shirts and 3 people wearing black shirts. And there's 2 basketballs, so they're not really playing basketball. They're not trying to sink hoops, you know. And they're passing the ball back and forth to each other. And your job is to pay attention to the people wearing white shirts. And what I'd like you to do in your mind's eye is imagine you're counting. You have 2 columns, and one column is the number of bounce passes, and the other column is the number of straight throws. Okay, so mentally you have these 2 columns. And then when we're done, we'll see what numbers you came up with, and we'll see who got the closest. Okay, and for this activity and experience to be effective, it needs to be done in total silence. So I would ask that while you watch this video, you remain silent and just mentally count. Okay, here we go. So what'd you get? How many bounce passes? How many?
16.
16? 16 straight passes,
14.
I got
14.
16 straight and 3 bounces.
I
That's
got
pretty
like
close.
seven or 8 bounces.
3 bounces
I only saw like 2 bounces.
and 13.
Okay, so the actual number is 2 bounce passes and 17 straight passes.
So that was, the bounce passes were supposed to be only between the white guys.
Right, only between the white people
All
and
of the
white.
bounces, they were bouncing it to themselves and then throwing it straight, so it
Right.
wasn't a bounce pass.
Okay, so who got the closest then?
I had 3 for both.
You did? Okay, so I have another question for you. Who saw the gorilla?
I did.
You saw the gorilla?
Yeah.
You saw the gorilla? You saw the gorilla? Okay. Who did not, if you did not see the gorilla, can you stand up for a second? Okay. I didn't see the gorilla myself. Okay, so you guys didn't see the gorilla. The rest of you did see the
Like my
gorilla.
first time.
My first time.
I did not.
That's okay. That's
Yeah,
okay.
my first time.
All right. So, for those of you who did not see the gorilla, do you believe me when I say there was a gorilla in this video? Let's watch it again.
Since I used this video.
But the human brain is not designed to.
Yeah. First time I saw it, I didn't see the gorilla, and when they told me there was a gorilla, I said, that's a different video. It's not the same video. There's the video.
Oh my goodness.
Wait till it meets his chest.
Because we were so
Yeah.
focused on counting.
Right,
We
yeah.
didn't see it.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so there's the gorilla.
So this
All right,
is very similar
so-
to games that, that kids play actually. Did you spot the diagonal mouse in that
Yeah,
video?
yeah, well, video games take advantage of it. So what you just experienced is what's called inattentional blindness, all right? And it's a phenomenon of our brain, it's a trick of the brain essentially, where when we deliberately focus on something, we subconsciously tune out unexpected events. So remember when I asked you to pay very close attention to the video? So I know you all were focused on it, but I also asked you to pay attention to the people wearing white shirts, right? And so your brain subconsciously tuned out anything other than those people in white shirts. So you couldn't see it. So research in this area of inattentional blindness has really had a big impact in the last 15 years since the video came out, especially in 2 different areas. One is in cell phone use while people are driving, right? It's distracted driving. They've done a lot of research around that and basically shown that, you know, when people are glancing at their phone and they're driving and then they hit someone and they'll say to the police officer, you know, I didn't see the kid on the bicycle. They just came out of nowhere. I didn't see them. And in fact, they didn't see them, just like you didn't see the gorilla. You're not lying, you're not stupid, you weren't not paying attention, you were just focused on the thing you were focused on.
I
You
can't
didn't
tell you how many
see-
gorillas I've run over in my car.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's just, all of us do it. It's just the way our brains work. And the other area where this kind of research has had a really big impact is in eyewitness testimony. When they're trying to figure out what happened and they talk to a lot of different people and all the different people have different stories about what happened. Oops. Let me go to the next one. Okay, now we're gonna watch a second video. And again, in this time, I would like all of you to watch carefully and count the number of bounce passes and the number of straight passes between people wearing white. All right, here we go. Okay, so how many did you get?
13 bounds.
13 bounds and
Four bounce passes.
I got
Maybe some
15
4 bounce
straight
passes.
and 4 bounds.
10 straight and 3 bounds.
okay. So the actual number is 10 straight and 6 bounce passes. All right, so how many of you saw the unicorn?
What?
I'm just kidding, guys. How many of you saw the gorilla?
Was
I
there-
noticed.
I noticed it.
Okay, last time I gave this talk earlier this week, and some of the people did not see the gorilla the second time. So,
I almost didn't, it was just as he was going off the side, oh, there's a
yeah,
gorilla
there's a
there.
gorilla. Okay, so I would like to ask all of those who saw this second video for the first time to stand up. If you've never seen the second video. Oh, it's pretty much everybody. Okay. So, of all of you, how many of you noticed the curtain? Whoop, I'm sorry. How many of you noticed the curtain changing color? Okay. A couple of you noticed the curtain changing color. And how many of you, thank you, Dave, how many of you noticed that one of the players wearing a black shirt walked off in the middle of the activity?
Whoa.
You noticed.
Yeah.
Just walked right off the stage. Okay. Yeah, all right, so you can sit down if you like. All right, so we'll watch it again real quick. So the curtain starts out as red, right? And they're playing, and then here comes the gorilla.
Yeah, so there was a shade there, so that's why it's very easy to miss that.
Yeah, yeah. And so she leaves, and then see the curtain? Now, it's, remember it started out bright red?
Yep.
Yeah.
And now it's orange. So, what happened here is that in the first video, I primed you to be biased towards only seeing the people wearing white t-shirts, so that's what you saw. In the second video, you were biased in a different way. You were primed to see the gorilla. So, not all of you saw the gorilla. Interestingly, when I went back to that video and counted the number of bounce passes and straight passes, I didn't see the gorilla. Even though I'm planning this talk and I knew it was there, I still didn't see it, because that's how strongly our brains tune out things that we're not deliberately paying attention to. Even when you know it's there, you don't see it, right? And that's because that's how our brains work. It's not some kind of failing, right? It's not the same thing as a cognitive, a prejudice bias, right? That you might learn over time. This is a different thing. This is based on how all of our brains actually are hardwired to function. So essentially what you did was you traded one set of beliefs for another set of beliefs, but you still couldn't stop yourself from missing the unexpected event. Because now you're focusing on two things, right? The number of passes and bounce passes and the gorilla, but you weren't focusing on the other stuff, so you missed it and you didn't expect it. So what I'd like you to do now is get into small groups of 2 or 3 and answer these questions. Just chat with amongst yourselves about what you just experienced.
So the first question is,
Okay.
if you did not see the gorilla in the first video,
So there's the first video where there are these people in white t-shirts, people in
the second question,
they're passing the ball, and we're told to focus on just the white t-shirts, and like how many passes, how many bounce passes, and then in the meanwhile, the gorilla ends up looking between the middle, they don't see it at all. Yeah.
I was shocked. The gorilla, like, he walks in, he goes like this, beats his chest, and then walks off. And I'm like, how did I know?
The first one we didn't do it.
And I was like, I'm gonna get this right. I'm gonna count every pass. I was like super focused on the pass.
So,
I was shocked.
because it was so
Like the first time I saw it too, like my girlfriend said it to me at work, like years ago. She goes, check this out. And then I was just like, yeah, she goes, did you see the gorilla? I'm like, no. I'm like, what are you talking about? She plays it and you're literally like unbelievable. Yes. And the point is that we have, what's it called?
Inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness.
Yeah, because you're so focused that you're not looking for surprises. That's Yeah.
The second one, I couldn't see the. The second one, I didn't see the girl walking over.
Right.
Focused on the gorilla and the
Yeah.
I didn't see the kid walking over.
And the
Yeah.
curtains didn't make
That I saw that one because I was concentrating on the color. So when I changed it, I figured it out. But the girl walking over, I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, in the second one, the gorilla actually distracted me from counting. And I lost count because I was like, I noticed the gorilla and I was like, oh, you know, there's the gorilla. It distracted me from counting. I didn't notice the girl and I didn't notice the color either. Yeah. How many, the task was to count the straight passes and also keep a tally of the balanced passes too. So it's not, you know, you have to work extra hard.
I was just going to say, like, you know, if you look at your cell phone and you get in a car accident, you're like, I think I'm out of nowhere. That, that's that is wild. And all the time that the gorilla has to like walk out his chest and then walk off.
How to observe.
Astounding.
How are you guys doing over here?
You should play it again. What's that? Yeah.
Oh, he was saying he was an Air Force pilot.
I'm sure, yeah.
So he was trained to observe.
Yes.
And I've read about like people in crime fighting units who are trained to come in and evaluate a crime scene and have to be really good at observing what they see.
You know, photographic memory, that's how you get to past 5 minute trained to develop. What you've seen in the recording in your mind is you saw clusters of this. So that's something that I would say I would have realization that actually not one of the things.
They taught you like how to have first one. I think what I think you're saying.
No, well, not really, but then this is all what you try to get the whole picture, but when you're focusing on certain aspect, you will miss out in your first skill, but then when you close your eyes and you want to talk again, you will be able to record it. Okay, this is something you saw. We didn't have enough time to plan your speech, recording video.
Oh, that's true. Maybe I should get just like.
But this is a very interesting way to use the psychology field, this thing, to demonstrate how distraction can reduce the productivity quite a bit in an environment.
So I think what I find interesting about this is that knowing that we have this tendency to inattentional blindness doesn't really protect us from it. Right.
Yeah.
We still are subject to it anyway. Which for me cements the idea that you can't really overcome it in the sense of training. Maybe in some cases, like I'm sorry, what was your name? Bridge. Was talking about training in the Air Force, training to observe. So possibly, there are ways to train yourself to be more observant. But for most of us, you're just going to be subject to it. So when somebody says to you, what happened, you could say, I saw a bunch of people playing basketball, right? Is that everything that happened? Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but that is what you saw, and that's valid, right? It's just not thinking that we see everything. So there are a couple of books that explain all of these ideas in great detail that I really love. This is my favorite. It's author won a Nobel Prize for, interestingly, behavioral, they call it behavioral economics. He basically founded the entire discipline. And he's a psychologist who happened to be sitting on the same floor with a bunch of economists. And he started chatting with them about their economic theories, and they make a lot of assumptions about how people behave. And he realized that they didn't know anything about psychology. They were just assuming that people would make rational decisions at any point that would get them more money. And the psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, knew that actually people sometimes do very irrational things because of the way their brains work. So he started doing a lot of research and little studies around money-related issues and won a Nobel Prize. And then this is another book that I just really completely love by a woman who is a lawyer and an art historian, and she would give talks on the weekend about her methods for observing paintings and understanding what was going on. And one time, a captain of a police department happened to be in the audience, and he loved her talk so much that he asked her to come train his police officers by running through her analysis of a painting and observations of the painting, and help them learn how to be better at analyzing crime scenes. And one of the things that I wanted to point out that she talked about in her book is the difference between perception and observation. And the way that she defines that is perception is your understanding, perception is the story that you tell yourself about what just happened, whereas observation is describing the things that you see. And that's a really important distinction to make when you're thinking about describing what happened or what's going on. Because our observations are pretty much always valid, right? So if you see 3 people with a basketball, then you saw 3 people with a basketball. That's a valid observation. Your perception and your understanding of it is a whole different thing. It's not that your perception is invalid. It's very important and very relevant. It's just somewhat subjective and based on your past experience in life. So Daniel Kahneman talks about this, and he calls it the illusion of understanding. And what happens to us is that, and we all do this, everybody, starting with young children as they're growing, we tell ourselves stories about what's going on. We look out at all the events, and we put together a narrative. And that story is based on our prior experience. It's based on information that we have available to us and what we think is going on. And the cognitive illusion happens when there's a mismatch between what is actually going on and the story that we're telling ourselves about what we think is going on. Okay, so we'll unpack this a little bit, but and this is true for all of us. We all tend to do this. We have this sort of comforting conviction that the world makes sense and that we can make sense of it. Our brains don't handle information that is unavailable to us very well. So our brains simply ignore it and pretend it's not real. In other words, we all, without being able to help it, we ignore our own ignorance, because our brain can only create a perception and create meaning out of what's available to it. And that could be information, could be past experiences, emotions, current events, and all the things that are going on. And because of this illusion, sometimes we don't see things that are actually happening. Or other times, we may see things that are not really there. Like we might be making some assumptions about the nature of the relationships between people that aren't really there, but they're based on our own past experiences and our background. So I see many of you nodding. I'm just curious, what comes to mind when you think about this?
Actually, what came to my mind is what I've seen a lot of on Facebook recently. They have the picture with some text there it's kind of like it's usually political. And what I imagine is how someone made some observations, they put together a story, and then they put the story on this picture and left out the observations it's based on. So then what you're seeing is their story, and they're presenting that like this is what you should believe actually happened. I see a lot of that from.
And it's very compelling.
Yeah.
Because our brains are hardwired to believe stories.
And, you know, if you talk to them, you say, well, it's absolutely true. But it's their observations were true. And they don't realize that they've made a story to explain those observations.
General stereotyping and categorizing. That's what comes to mind.
So that, I had a question came in mind, this terms you come up with. I was thinking about selective memory. So selective memory is related to this?
Selective memories?
Yeah, you have. Because you
I think, I don't know enough about that to feel
try to
comfortable
remember only
really.
thing what you want to remember. So it's similar to.
I think that that our brains ignore the things that we don't know.
Yeah.
And it could be possible that some memories are not available to us, so it's as if they're not there. But I don't know enough about the phenomenon of selective memory to say that it's related to this illusion.
Absolutely, because selective memory usually is, you try to remember what you want to remember.
Right.
What you want to remember is what you believe in, what
Right.
you have a
Right.
perception about.
Right.
So you understand that, everything else is just over a translation.
And we tend to believe the story that we're
Exactly.
telling ourselves
Yeah.
about
And
whatever
we
it
form our own
is.
story based on that.
And maybe we call that selective memory, but maybe what's really happening is all these events occurred, we tell ourselves a story about what it meant, and we believe our story.
I'm curious about what you were saying, though, about what came up for you from this.
Oh,
Because yours is, what came up for you is much different than what you've been
yeah,
saying.
yeah.
If you don't mind.
No, but, I mean, you know, a lot of us are trained to, you know, quickly put things in a box and categorize and create a story around what we observe, whether it's true or not. It's comfortable for you. So whether that's positive or negative stereotyping, or just general, you know, it's just the thing that I observe is a very natural thing.
Comfortable is like the good word you used. Comfortable, because you feel.
Yeah,
Right.
not just me, I'm talking about people in general.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I also think, like, when we live in environments where we're rewarded for finding solutions,
Mhm.
that fits into what you're saying too, right? That
Right,
often the
exactly.
solution fits into a category.
Yes.
And if
Yeah.
that category is a creation of our own bias,
Yeah.
then what's the value of the solution, right? Is the solution valuable?
So that's a perfect segue into the
That
next
was
thing I
not
was going
planned.
to talk about.
I'd like to follow that.
Yeah, absolutely, that'd be great.
So, have any of you been involved in any kind of root cause analysis in your career? I see it in the software area where I work now all the time when there's a bug or something goes wrong, and then they go back and try to figure out what's behind it. But also, people talk about doing root cause analysis in the realm of project management and program management, is to go back and try to figure out if a project went awry or a program went awry, what happened, what went wrong. And I'm sure some of you have had the experience where, you know, two different people go to a really important meeting, you couldn't go, you were homesick or whatever, right? And so you go to each of those people and you say, what happened in the meeting? And you get two very different stories. Even to the point where you might get different action items that came out of the meeting, different bottom lines, you know, not just nuances, maybe nuances, but also, you know, fundamentally, and then you're like, wait a minute, what happened? What's going on here? So, sometimes what happens to us is we see what we're trained and what we're expecting to see. So like when we did the gorilla video, you guys did a pretty good job of counting the passes because I told you that's what you should pay attention to. And then in the second video, most of you did a pretty good job of actually seeing the gorilla also because you were expecting it. But it's very hard to see the unexpected. The other thing, though, that I want to point out in all of this is that the subjective filters that we all apply are not bad. And they're not even necessarily invalid, right? Just because somebody didn't see the gorilla doesn't mean, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. In this context, it means that that's, you know, a demonstration of how, a little quirk of how your brains work. But let's say it was really important that somebody saw the gorilla and they didn't see it. It doesn't mean they're bad at their job, or they're stupid, or they don't care, or they weren't paying attention, or on all the things that we tend to list when we're trying to blame, right? Bringing blame into the equation. So subjective findings are important to consider because in the subjective findings, there might be something that's important when you're doing something as intense as root cause analysis. So I just wanted to make clear that I'm not suggesting that you discount those, just that you understand them for what they are, and that you can make that distinction between the observation and the perception, or the objective observation, or the subjective interpretation. So what Amy Herman talks about in her book is a way to not so much overcome this, because we all have the tendency to do it. Knowing about it doesn't protect you, but you can take some steps, which is to first look, talk to other people, get data, pull data out of systems, look at records, whatever you need to do, and then go back and look again. In other words, take your time and think again before you come to your conclusion, especially when you're doing something important like root cause analysis. Like, it really is important now, this time, to figure out what the heck happened and how we can prevent this from happening in the future. It's easy on your first look to think that you see the root cause and to write it up in a report and you're done. And you can short circuit the learning and the insight, not just for yourself, but I mean for your team, when you don't take that second look.
Can I make a comment about that last slide?
Sure.
The order of that is important, because if you do the middle one first, you consult others before you look, then you're kind of biased. It's like what you told us, what we should, something about what you would expect to see in that video. And if we consult with others, then we'll be looking for what they reported, and we might miss something else that they left out. Or
Yeah, like somebody says, yeah, I know what happened. There was a gorilla walked across the stage. And you watch the video and you're like, oh yeah, I see the problem. The gorilla walked across the stage. Okay, that's what we write down as our root cause.
Yeah.
And you miss the curtain changing color, and you miss the person walking off the stage. I mean, metaphorically, right? Yeah, so that's a very good point. Trust your own initial impressions, even knowing that they're partial and imperfect. They're still important and they're still valid, and then get the information much more widely.
Plus, if you look first and then consult, that also helps you to ask right questions.
Right.
It's very important. Then you ask people what happened. If you're not prepared in advance, you cannot ask that question. They may give you something that's crap, garbage, you want me to make out anything from.
Right.
Third stage of the fail.
Okay, so I'd like you to have take a few minutes again. You can, if you want to walk. Why don't we do that? Why don't we have everybody get up and walk around the room and talk to different people for this one?
We want to stay.
And I'd like you to just share a story with each other about a situation where you were either doing a formal root cause analysis, or you were in a high stakes scenario where you're trying to figure out what happened. And think about ways that people in that environment, including yourself, sought out data to support the story they were telling themselves about what they already believed, and were not able to see other perspectives in order to get a full picture. Would anyone care to share their stories with the group?
I think we had a conversation about, I think Raj said, maybe looking and then looking again is maybe sometimes not enough. Maybe you have to look a third time,
Yeah.
right?
Have it be iterative a
And,
little bit.
and then that got me thinking like, well, that kind of resonated in terms of what agility is all about, is dealing with uncertainty and really answering the question of how certain do you want to be? Sometimes looking twice, you won't get 100% certainty, but you'll get good enough certainty to just make a decision and move forward.
Right.
Whereas if you keep digging for the root cause and spend, so much time that it's just not worth it for
Right.
just an answer that you could have just made that decision based on like 60% certainty of what the root cause is, So that's kind of light bulb that came up.
Anybody else?
So we thought that sometimes if regardless of what the decision is, if the receiver isn't ready to receive it, it's a big problem.
You mean when you're sharing the information after you've done some kind of root cause analysis or something?
And then how do you prevent yourself from being prejudiced to satisfy?
There is something that we had to, for example, the one example that I gave Krishnan was that the root cause analysis was done for a defect that was found in production by a team in my work, one of my previous workplaces. So the kind of questions that were framed to the code reviewer were, the language itself said something about the questions that, hey, I already know you are at fault. It should have been caught at code review time. It wasn't. And so no matter what you say, we are going to put it in our report that it should have been caught during code review and not during any other phase of the development or testing.
Yeah.
And that's going to be it. But then in the end, in that scenario, it was found it was a race condition that could not have been caught in any area. And it happened in production. We now know why it happened. We can fix it. So the thing is that it was like a wild witch hunt where they just wanted someone to blame, and so there was a pre-existing bias starting out.
Right.
That I already know that I'm going to train you. I'm going to ask all the phases, the questions that are there, but then they're framed in such a manner that when you're answering them, you already know that you've been assigned guilty verdict, and and then you're just trying to prove yourself innocent, and even though whatever you say is just doesn't matter. They're going to twist it in that form. So that bias. So without that bias, if you ask those questions and then you analyze all of those questions that have been answers that have been responded to by different phases and try to see, yes, where the problem could have been really, then it makes better sense instead of biasing first and then asking questions and then just looking at the responses. But then your brain will be like, oh yeah, I told you it's going to be that particular phase. And so that's one of the.
Well, I have another little fun activity for you around this idea. So what I'm going to show you next is a black and white photograph, and it's a real, unaltered photograph. And I'd like you to look at it in silence and ask yourself what you see. I forgot to ask you, is there dry erasing? Oh, I think there is.
Yeah, there should be.
So if you think you see any kind of recognizable object of any type, just tell me what it is. Just shout it out.
Wait, her silence?
Shout in silence. Shout in silence. Okay. That's not going to work. Go ahead. Tell me what you see.
I see Black Panther.
A black panther.
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody else said something?
I see a path between two pills,
A wall and a path.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was another one.
Nice and salty.
Skull. Okay.
I feel like a map or something.
It's not like-
Yeah, so it
it's
looks
like-
like Italy.
It looks like-
It's part of Italy.
It's satellite map, yeah.
A map of Italy. Okay.
Footprints on the lunar surface.
Footprints. Okay.
So it feels like a Rorschach test.
Yeah, I always get that one, Rorschach test. Okay.
I
All right.
can see one thing, that alien thingy walking from top.
Okay. Now I'm going to give you a hint. Well, I'm going to tell you first. There is a recognizable object in this, or actually, it's an animal. Right? So now that I've told you it's an animal, do you see anything recognizable?
I just see the old lady and the young lady.
Okay, yeah. I know that one, right?
It's only Lisa turning around.
Yeah. I think she means me. She means her and me.
Now I see a dog.
A dog, okay? A dog. So we do have
Yeah,
one.
on Black Panther.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You did say Black Panther.
This is gonna leap out
Okay.
any second.
Now ready for this?
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Oh, come on.
It's a cow.
Come on, that's really.
Now here's where it gets really
Can you
fun.
go back without the
Yeah.
lines?
I will. I want you to look at this for a minute.
No.
Now it's.
Do you see the cow?
Yes.
I don't see
Do you see the cow now?
Yes.
Yeah, but
So-
those lines are so arbitrary.
Well, so it actually is a picture of a cow. So this is ears,
Yeah.
nose,
He
eyes.
wants his money back.
Okay,
How they
so here's what I'd like you to do now. Look at this picture.
Now I see.
Now I can see it.
And now you can see the cow. Now, what I would like you to do is unsee the cow.
No, come on.
Got it. I am
That's the easy part.
No, it's hard.
I can't do it now.
Nice.
So,
And Panther.
yeah, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So this is a very famous experiment called Renshaw's cow. And the guy who came up with this has shown it to thousands and thousands of people, and very few of them see the cow. But what's particularly interesting is that once you've seen it, it's really hard to unsee it, right?
Yep.
And when I thought about this in relation to Agile, it kind of reminded me of how when I first discovered Agile, like in the first few months, and I was so excited, and it was Scrum and Agile, and it was so cool, and it worked so well, and it was so neat, and I just could see it. And I wanted everyone around me to see it, and it's like I would come up to them and say, see, is this great thing, it's Agile, it works. And they'd look at me like I was out of my mind, like, what are you talking about? And it's very challenging to try to engage with people who don't see what you see. It's also very difficult to remember what it's like before you knew that Agile works, before you'd ever been introduced to it and you didn't know anything about it. It's hard to put yourself in that frame of mind. Why are you laughing?
Because over the weekend, my wife said to me, we are not agile, it's a conversation, not a feedback loop.
It just sort of becomes part of what this speaks to is that we have a hard time not seeing something that's been elevated to our perception, right, our understanding. So if we were to go back and watch those two videos, forget about counting all the bounce passes, that was a distraction, but just kind of watch the videos, you would not be able to not see the gorilla. If you're just kind of relaxed and watching it, it's like you know it's there, you're gonna see the gorilla. It's very difficult to unsee something. And what this speaks to is that our minds are really bad at reconstructing past states of belief. And in the research that they do on this, when they go and they talk to people and they ask them questions about prior beliefs, they substitute their current beliefs instead. This is just a human tendency. We just, yeah?
I think this also goes back a little bit to the brain elasticity. You see, when there were experiments done to see how elastic a human brain is for a kid as compared to an older adult, what scientists have found is that children have a tendency to be able to unlearn certain things very quickly as compared to well-developed. Unlearn, yes.
Okay.
So the experiment that was performed was, I don't know if, and if you have seen that bike wherein the guy had reversed this
Reverse
thing.
bike.
So, yeah. So in that case, his kid was able to unlearn to ride a normal bike very quickly, and he was able to adjust and move forward in a straight line, whereas it took him several more weeks, actually months, to actually unlearn how to ride a normal bike, and then learn to drive a bike with the handles reversed, in the sense that if you move left, the bike would go right. So all of this comes back to that brain elasticity concept a little bit.
Yeah, it does. Well, you know, interestingly, with Renshaw's cow, small children always see the cow. He shows them the picture and they kind of glance and they go, oh, it's a cow, and then they go back to their thing.
Because that's what their drawings look like.
Yeah.
It's a dog.
Well, yeah, but they they don't really know why, but they have some theories about how we as adults have a lot of experience. We have a lot of, you know, filters, a lot of information and preconceived ideas that are packed into our brains, and so
they're not biased.
But they're young, they're 3, they're 4, and they are just more.
Well, and
intuitive.
even when I looked at it initially, someone else said it looked like a digital image or something.
Yeah.
Right, a map, or a satellite map, exactly, and that's exactly what I thought when I saw it, and once I decided it was a map of something, I couldn't make it look like anything other than part of Italy, and it doesn't even look like part of Italy, so I'm not sure what I was doing. Right, and now I look at it and think, how could I have ever thought that was a map? But you're right, it's my story, right, it's my training and background from years ago being a cartographer that, oh, that's what it is.
So that just reminds me one thing I want to share. Very important information. Future learning, biggest challenge will be unlearning. But it's easy to learn, very hard or almost impossible to unlearn. So in future generations, we all advise to all us also that, because the way technology and information is changing, evolving, future people will be learning, unlearning. That's going to be the way of life, and that will define your success. That will define your smartness. And your value.
Yeah, your ability to be flexible.
Yes.
I would argue, well, I feel, having grown up in an era when, you know, like I tell my kids, we didn't have voicemail. I mean, if you called the house and no one was home, it would just ring for 50. It would just ring forever. And if somebody was already on the phone, they'd get a busy signal. And my kids are like, what's that? You know, I mean, I feel like I've had to learn and unlearn. Well, not so much unlearn as forget. Mm-hmm. Like I learned these certain skills, like I used to use DOS, right, and use a computer and back in the day, and I had to, you know, just kind of let that go and move on. And it's only going to accelerate. But what's important, I think, is this is one of my favorite quotes from the Visual Perception book. She said, "We can never assume that anyone else sees what we see, that we see what they see, or that either of us accurately sees what is really there." And I think that we can take this idea and apply it in the Agile setting when we're, if you think of the gorilla as like, is the Agile mindset, or the gorilla is Agile culture, metaphorically, right? Once you've sort of, quote unquote, seen the light, and you've seen how well it can work, you can't really unsee it, just like you can't unsee the cow. But you can also never assume that other people see what you see. Like sometimes people will complain about Agiles because they use too much jargon, and they'll just talk and assume that everybody else sees what they see. Well, we can't help it. We naturally do that. But the reality is, like, the number of people who see and understand Agile is minuscule compared to people working out in the world who may need that mindset and have never had exposure to it, or maybe have had exposure to it in a setting where it wasn't implemented successfully or thoroughly and it didn't work. And so people say, oh, that Agile stuff is a disaster, right? So how do you help them see what you see? And part of that is that we need to be open to their perception. In other words, when we make assumptions about what we think they should be seeing, or we get impatient, like they just don't see it, what's wrong with them? We need to be a little more understanding that when somebody doesn't see the gorilla, it's not a flaw. It's not because they're stupid. It may be because they're not informed. But it's human nature not to see the things that are not in our awareness, right? So I think for our challenge as Agilists, like if you take that video as a metaphor, is that in an Agile environment, we strive to be able to see everything. Now, we had the little example of root cause analysis, but I'm not talking anymore about that. I'm talking more about in an Agile environment, we're trying to see the big picture. We're trying to bring systems thinking in to help us work with our teams, right? So we want to be open to all of these different perspectives. And we need to remember that we ourselves are going to be subject to all these biases also. Because we can't help it. It's not because we're stupid or bad or anything. It's just how our minds work. So whenever we're in an environment where we have to figure out what happened, we need to just remember this tendency to tell ourselves stories and to believe our own stories. And sometimes we'll even engage in pointless debates with other people about whether their story is more right or wrong than our story. Whereas most of the time, a lot of the time, they're both true, or they're both relevant and helpful. And remember what I was talking about before about how our brain can only make sense of things based on what we know and information that's available to us. So if information is not available to us for any reason, we ignore it. Our brains automatically ignore our ignorance.
But there's something on top of that, and this is what we were talking about, right? It's not even just that you ignore it. It's even when someone points it out to you. If you're not primed to hear it, even as a possibility, you can't even hear the words. It's not that you're not listening, and you might be not listening, but assuming you are listening, you can't even hear the meaning of those words if you're not able to take a different perspective.
Right?
I would almost
Like
venture
to add to that, and in your profession, there's a saying that the teacher is always there, the student isn't always ready.
Yeah.
I was just thinking too, and also in terms of Agile, it's the container, because oftentimes I'll get people there to see the perspective, but 20 minutes later, they're right back to it because they don't have a container or their identity's attached. And I find that, when I witness change, it's often because they're able to shed some of that identity, or there's a container, like you have Agile, you have supportive people that are allowing you to think that new way or act that new way.
Mm-hmm.
So you mean like in a retrospective, all of a sudden someone has an aha moment and the team makes this commitment that they're going to try and work differently, but then they go back to their cubicles and it's like the same crap is still waiting for them at their desk. Their performance management is coming up, which asks them to behave a certain way. Right? Right?
You need to act, yeah.
Right.
And
yeah.
there's a fear of acting, a fear of looking stupid, a fear of listening to authority. I mean, like you said, we all come from different perspectives and different reasons why we don't change. I think looking stupid would be phenomenal if people would just look, or silly. If that wasn't a social faux pas, I think so much more change would happen.
Right.
That's a really good point.
At Agile 2015, there was this big keynote speech about the failure bow. Like every time you do something wrong, do a failure bow on purpose and own it. And that's the thing that you can do as an Agilist, because hopefully the people around you will start adopting that. Oh, they screw up? Take a failure bow. Just own it, right? And then the team can go forward. That's cool.
See that one of my son's colleges didn't, for the first year, they didn't do great because they wanted to teach their kids how to fail safely. Because once you get out into the world, you're going to be judged, you're going to be shamed, in the first year, you didn't have a grade. They just wanted kids to be able to think out of the box.
Well, and to learn that
That's right.
failure can lead to learning and growth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, yeah, to be open to that, that's interesting. What college was that?
Yeah, I write that down.
It was MIT.
MIT, I thought so. There's another reason they did that, but I went to Wellesley, which is in Boston, so I had a lot of friends at MIT.
Yeah.
There were high suicide rates at MIT.
Very
Because
high.
the students came from all over the country and they were all straight A engineering, whatever. They were
Yeah.
just genius level kids, right? And had been genius their whole lives and graduated top of their class and won awards. And all of a sudden they got to MIT and they failed a class and they couldn't handle it.
Good.
Right.
I had
So
to
there
pay, I had to pay an extra $1,500 a year for extended, all the parents had to pay for extended hospitalization for exactly that.
It's
What
pretty
is that, like
expensive.
counseling?
Yeah.
Like psychological counseling?
Yeah, it was,
Yeah.
you, part of the
Wow.
health
When
insurance.
you bring that many genius people together and they've all been competitive their whole lives.
Yeah.
And now they're competing against the best of the best of the best.
And they're no longer the best.
They're no longer the biggest.
And that's a huge adjustment for them. It's a tough adjustment. And they make it, most of them are fine, and they adjust, and it's all good.
I see that one here, right here in TJ.
Yeah.
Go to that TJ class, this one, all the students come from various schools which are, on top of their class. When they go to TJ, they are just ordinary.
This is red.
They're just being regular, this one, so many of them don't deal with that one properly.
It's a challenge.
Oh yeah, it's a challenge for parents also.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that comes back to what we were talking about the stories we tell ourselves. Right? So if you are super smart and you're telling yourself a story, I am the smartest human being and I'm going to change the course of history and I am going to make $1 zillion and make my parents proud and all that. And that's the story you're telling yourself, and all of a sudden, now you have to tell yourself a new story. I failed a class. It's the disconnect, And my journey through all this reading and learning and thinking about how it reflects with Agile is to kind of, Daniel Kahneman talks about this in his book, is sort of laughing at yourself, like learning to laugh at the stories you're telling yourself, especially the negative self-talk that we all engage in from time to time. And realizing that, when you're thinking, oh man, if only they would just listen to me, I could figure this out and I know what to do, and they just don't believe me, and all those kinds of, it's like, and then I can sort of laugh and say, yeah, like, that's the story I'm telling myself. But who knows, might be true, might not. Somebody else is telling themselves the same story, and it enables you to have a more open frame of mind, And, this is my favorite Agile guy. I love all the Agile guys, but this to me is sort of the epitome of what we're talking about when we're talking about paying attention. And really thinking about everything that's going on, right? People get so hung up on the stuff on the left, and they think, I heard this just today. Oh, we don't need to worry so much about process and tools because we value individuals. And I'm like, we need to worry about process and tools. We're in a QA environment. We've got a lot of craziness going on. They're not as important as the individuals. And they're not as important as the interactions. However, they're still important. And as Agilists, we need to keep that in mind, right? We need to sort of be able to absorb it all. It's not all about the gorilla. It's all about the basketball, the players, and all kinds of other parameters that somebody might decide are important for whatever the heck they're doing. And we can never see it all ourselves. So when I say, we need to see it all, what I really mean is the collective we, right? Because the kind of seeing that I'm suggesting can only be done with a group of people. Because any one person is going to have these cognitive biases. We all will. And the complexity of the world we live in is such that no one person can kind of figure it out and solve stuff. I mean, unless, I don't know, maybe there's an exception, but I've never met a person like that. So what we can do, though, is we can just keep asking this question. What else is here? All right? We know now that we've been through this little demonstration of it, that we have the tendency towards inattentional blindness, hindsight bias, and the illusion of understanding, and we know that we can't do anything about it. But what we can do is be aware that our knowledge is always partial, and that while we can never really see it all, we can continue to ask this question or variations of this question, because there's always going to be more. And to speak to something you mentioned earlier when we were talking about root cause analysis, which, by the way, I don't mean to suggest that I promote root cause analysis. I was just using that as an example to wrap your head around these ideas. Sometimes we don't need to know everything that's going on, right? Sometimes it doesn't matter. We need to move on, and we need to decide on a course of action. So, but when you're in the situation where it does matter, when you really do need to figure out what happened so that you can deal with it, or prevent it from happening again or whatever, then the awareness of the partial, that you're always going to have partial information is very helpful, and that there's always another way to look at it. And to, what I've been doing with my teams is working with them to help them have this awareness. Right? So they'll come to me, there's this huge problem, and they're like, Lisa, what do you think? Can you help with this? And instead of telling them what to do or giving them my assessment, I help them stay in this space of what else is here, so that they themselves can start to see more broadly, and then they can work their way towards what actions they need to take. So, it's our last little activity. Maybe we could do this one as a group. I had designed it to be small groups. What do you prefer? Would you rather do a little small group work now, or would you rather do a group discussion?
There's few enough of us here.
What do you think? All right, if you'd rather do a small group discussion, thumbs up. If you'd rather split off and talk so that more people have a chance to have a conversation, then thumbs down.
Good.
Okay,
That's
so
the same thing. You said small group and then small group.
I just saying. Must be hindsight bias. Illusion of understanding.
So which thumb is whole group?
Okay, so whole group, small group.
Okay.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. Whole group. Okay, we got consensus. All right. So, would anyone like to offer an answer to the first question?
So I'll use the example of there was a bug that wasn't found before production. And so that ends up being the second video gorilla, where we're not doing as good of development because we're doing nth level code reviews, right? And we're doing nth level fortify and all the other things because it's more important to have 0 bugs than to release something. Right, it's that joke of the only code that the government really likes is 0, right? If you can produce no code, you can say, I've produced no code. The goal is that it will eventually create a user interface for a budgeting system, but so far we have 0 code and it's completely secure.
Right, it's not going to break anything.
It's not going to break anything, it's completely secure, and everybody understands the intent, so we can brief on it. Anyway, so that's the gorilla, I think, is the one bug that makes everybody like cringe of having that again. Oh, can I say one more thing?
Pick me.
So I once went to this tour of Motley Fool, I think they're in Arlington, and they had this huge poster of the world's most interesting man, the Dos Equis guy, and he's leaning over, and he says,
I don't know.
yeah, he said, I don't always test my code, but when I do, it's already in production. So that's I bring that up not just because it's funny, but also because they've decided to ignore that gorilla.
Yeah.
Right? They've decided that our job is to count passes and bounces, so ignore the gorilla on purpose.
Right.
I'm not sure if this can be called as a gorilla. This is something that I find in my current workplace very often, is that, say for example, there's a new functionality you want to build, and either me or my teammates come up with a new idea with the new C++ constructs that we have in the new standards, and we go like, well, we can just import, we can just call this library and we can use this. No, this functionality has already been implemented in 1990. Take it from another component, copy paste those 20 pieces of line into your existing code, and we know it is proven that it works. So we are minimizing risk. But we don't want to improve upon our coding skills or constructs of whatsoever. I don't know if that can be considered a gorilla.
Well, it is in a sense, because here what I'm asking is things you observe that others may not see.
Okay.
And maybe the thing you observe
is that there is a better way of doing something.
Right. You see not just the better way, but the consequences of the better way.
Right. Faster.
Why it will be better for, and you mentioned learning. Right. You mentioned people learning a new technique. So there's multiple benefits of the better way that you see.
Right.
But it can be really hard to explain that to people who don't see what you see.
But the gorilla can be positive too, right?
Yes, absolutely. It must be anything.
Too, because it can be an opportunity.
It could be what?
Opportunity to make more money.
Right.
Ultimately, right? So if you find some exception, so like risk, it can be positive risk or negative
Yeah.
risk. So gorilla can be positive. So that's how I look at any situation. So if you find more problem, you're lucky that you found a problem and fix it. It's a good thing that problem is there. Otherwise, you don't need to be there. So I don't.
Because it just depends on the perspective that you're taking about what it is that's important. How you decide what's important is based on the story that you're telling yourself. And the stories other people are telling themselves. So sometimes, when people come running into your office and they're all upset, and they say, this happened, and you think, oh, I might have back in the day responded by thinking, oh, this happened, oh my God, this is the end of the world, we gotta do this, right? Now I have a very different response. I think, well, that's an interesting story that they're telling themselves about what they think just happened and what we need to do next. I need to find out more. I need to check and see and, get some more information.
Basically, always take first step back a bit.
Yeah.
Look at the entire situation, try to get a whole systemic view, software engineering systemic view, or a bigger picture in general sense, and then maybe respond to it.
So all of these things are the gorillas,
Yeah, right.
We all try to
Right.
do that, or sometimes we prevent it based on deadlines and culture and all kinds of constraints within the organization that prevent you from preventing a lot of decision makers from seeing the data that they really need to make better decisions.
Well, in the language, for me, that really describes your transition is that you have decided to not be subject to these other people's stories, but you have made those stories an object outside of you, right? So subject to an object to or object of. And in adult development, that's a thing, right? That we come to realize that we don't have to be subject to our own stories, and we also don't have to be subject to other people's stories. And by staying, like I like yours, taking a step back, right, that we remove ourselves from that kerfuffle, and by doing that, you're able to see these other perspectives, or you're able to at least ask for them.
And you're able to help other people see them, right?
Hopefully, especially that person.
Right, you're able to, which is the powerful thing. Like this is partly about yourself and your own personal insight, but when it becomes really powerful is when you're able to do this with a group of people and help everyone to uncover whatever it is they need to uncover about what's going on to make either the right decision to fix the thing, or, make a choice or take action. And so the last question is, do you have any thoughts about what you might do now, going back and working with other people about ways that you can, all of you, share what you observe with each other. I mean, if you go back and say, I saw this cool gorilla video and it was really neat, and people are going to be like, what are you talking about?
Well, and the thing is, you can't tell them that, because if you want to show them the video, you just wrecked it.
Yeah, well, that's true, but.
No, but it's a question, like, how would you get your teams to start to unpack that there are other perspectives within the team, external to the team?
Is that even possible in most of our environments? I can see that's possible in consumer industry much easier, because I've worked in consumer industry, I've worked with the government, I've worked in finance industry, which is again very close to the government side in terms of functioning. In consumer industry, I've found that people are very open, or more open to the team observation and different perspectives, even discussing design before it gets implemented, or performing test-driven development, and open to the design that comes out of TDD, as opposed to having an architect dictate a particular design and coding. But that's not what I would see in a finance industry or in a government industry, where they want everything nailed down, and then coding is just, hey, putting it in a coding programming language of what we expect. So then how do you even, from a software engineering standpoint, how do you get the team to see another aspect of doing something in a better manner when everything is already nailed down, even though it might
Right.
be that.
So that's a real challenge. If you've done essentially sort of a waterfall-y approach with a big design up front, with all your requirements locked down and each of them numbered and in a spreadsheet, then the challenge would be, it depends on who you're working with. Like, I know many Agile coaches are working with executive leaders or other leadership in the organization who are trying to make decisions about what their architecture should look like, or what direction their software should go. And so you do have to somewhat decide, on a micro level or a macro level, how you want to apply this. But I've seen individual teams adopt a more open approach in the areas where they do have some control, right? And I don't know, it's that you're sort of pinpointing like the fundamental challenge of Agile transformation, right? Which is adopting the mindset throughout the entire organization, so that Agile isn't just something those teams do down there. And if you have a big design up front with all your requirements locked down, it's hard to do that. But I've worked now for a couple of different government organizations, and I can tell you they are using Agile. And they're not doing the big design up front. And they are allowing teams to be more creative and more responsive. And it's messier and it's more complex, but they're experimenting with it, and they're trying it. And they're talking about it and trying to spread it, So I know it can be done, because I'm working in a very Agile environment supporting DHS. So I know that there's sort of a role model to some extent for other organizations. They're going through a really, really hard time right now, a lot going on politically, so it's a challenging environment. But finance, that's so highly regulated. I mean, does anybody else work in finance?
I'm the only one in finance in this
Well,
right now.
Yeah. I mean, at one point I supported the FDIC, but being so regulated is different.
So there's a meetup called Agile Nova that's hosted at Capital One, and about half the people there, the fact that it's hosted at Capital One, are finance people. So if you're looking for answers, we may not have them here,
Yeah.
but that might be a good group of people to look for that particular meetup.
But I think, unless we're working at the level of Agile transformation coaching, we're not going to be able to, get at what you're talking about. I think, for me, your question is, how can we take what we've talked about tonight back to our teams, right? Or give back to my team because they're kids.
What's that?
Then the micro level.
Yeah, because I think that's where we, right, when you think about where's your sphere of influence, right? Where's your sphere of control, where's your sphere of influence, and the rest of it is just the soup that we're sitting in, we can't even worry about it, right?
Yes, that's the team problem, if you're just a team, I mean, depends on,
Yeah.
if you're a manager, then it's at the management level problem, but
I have two distinctly different development teams that I work with. One's Microsoft, and they're fully adapted to Agile, and it's pretty safe. I mean, we can have open conversations and share perspectives, and actually, based on sharing perspectives, we could actually come to some kind of norm. And then I have another development team that was historically legacy and has been with that particular agency for decades. And that's a real challenge because everything is, a threat or a blame or an open discussion is not safe. And it's a real challenge. So I guess we could have to just try to do more of the coaching along the lines of compensation with the legacy type team. And try to get them feeling more comfortable with taking risks
Right, and maybe even having conversations about things that have nothing to do with their actual work.
That helps.
Help people to speak up.
Yeah, that helps.
I can mention, sort of answer what I can take back is to encourage my team to take interest in what everybody is doing in the team. So for example, if someone is working on certain thing and they might not be aware of the other impacts that they might be impacting. So for example, as a person, I know that, hey, that person is struggling with something, and all of a sudden, if they mention something in our stand-ups, they can point out, hey, you can do something like this as well, and this will impact such and such thing, and so this will be good for the next user story or the coming up in the next sprint or something like that. So basically keeping an open mind and open ears. Most of people I've found in stand-up says they just zone out. They get their update and then they zone out. Nobody's listening to anybody else in the team. And then, so the thing is that shared perspective is not there, because once that user story gets, the code check gets checked in, and somebody else wakes up, hey, you could have done it this way. Where were you when I was working on the user story? You could have mentioned that in the stand-up.
I think sometimes we forget that a user story is a story.
It's
It's a story. It's not a task list.
It's not a task list, exactly.
And sometimes, and I've had to challenge my teams in stand-up to just, I don't want this to be just a quick status report, where each of you give your status and you don't really pay attention to each other and you go back to your work. I mean, I'll cancel the meeting rather than do that. So let's tell each other a story. What's the story? Yeah?
One thing I did once, because that kind of got the norm, is everyone zoned out, checked out, status update, and I said, in the next stand-up, the update has to be given by someone that is not the person giving the update.
You mean someone else who's working on
Someone
a
else
different
has to
story.
explain what's going on with whatever the story that we want to know what's going on with it.
I did that with one of my teams, and it started actually, I got the idea in Jira. It says assignee and reporter, and the reporter is the person who created the issue in Jira, right? I said, you know what? After a ticket is created, the person will change it to somebody else. So the assignee will still be the person who created it because they're working on that thing. That's usually how we did it on that team. The reporter will be somebody else. And so the reporter was not working on the thing. They still had to read the ticket.
Oh, that's interesting.
At least before
So
stand-up.
the reporter the meaning of the reporter became different once the ticket was
Right.
worked on.
I
That's
think,
interesting.
I think you can use the power of stories to your advantage, especially when you model your own awareness that the story you're telling yourself may not be accurate, right? So sometimes people will come to me and ask me, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff going on, what do you think is happening? And I'll say, well, I'm telling myself the story. And the story I'm telling myself is this. but my story may not be accurate. What's your story? I mean, to start using the language of stories.
Yes.
Right? And it draws people in because they're kind of like, well, that's different. And then they start telling you a story. And then somebody else starts telling their story. And before you know it, you get a little closer to shared understanding. And you could even do that in a stand-up format. If you got to prime the team and get them ready, so don't freak out. But just say, I'd like you each to tell a story about what's going on with your work. Versus, we're not going to look at the Jira board today. We'll just tell stories to each other and look at each other in the eye and just explain stuff.
Does cultural change the culture of sharing information instead of just responsible people to say stuff?
And when
Or
you,
easy.
I'm sorry?
Understanding everybody's perspective, that helps. When it's unknown things that we never noticed comes out automatically. Helps.
That only works when everybody believes in that Scrum process, the whole team thing. And most of the time they are either forced into that one, so they are like resisting that. I don't want to do this one. Are you trying to force this one onto me? So if the team doesn't believe that one, then the Scrum won't be successful. Basically, everybody has to believe that one, that we are working for a common goal, but it's a team thing. How does it won't work? I have seen people come and do these things, not pay attention to that one. The Scrum Master is talking about something, they're trying to cram as many story points into that as possible. 2-week sprint, I want 100 story points. Well, you'll get 100 story points. They'll start inflating their story points. That's it. You'll get 100 story points. But,
Everything is 100 points.
Yeah. So
our product owner said, our product, she said, we need to have more story points.
Right.
Because of some political stuff that was going on. It's like, okay, we'll get you more story points, no problem. We'll just inflate all the numbers. She's like, no, that's not what I meant. I said, well, that's what's going to happen if you come in here and beat people over the head and say we want more story points. What do you really want? You really want less bugs and more features. So, let's focus on that.
It adds more stress to the team also, that they have to complete that one basically. So then in that time, interaction becomes very less. They just want to complete their work. Right now, I don't care about what these guys are doing. I just need to complete my 20 story points for those 2 weeks and then get out of it. That's it. So they won't. If he has a problem, I won't have the time to go and help that guy right now, because I need my 20 story point to complete. Because if it's not done, at the end of that one, the Scrum Master is going to ask me, okay, hey, what have you been doing? So it becomes a rat race.
This doesn't sound like a Scrum Master servant leader.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds more like a Scrum Master's taskmaster type.
Well, and this, right, and so what you're seeing in that team is that people are protecting themselves. They're self-protective,
Right.
because you've got a taskmaster as
Right.
opposed to a Scrum Master.
Yep.
And where I thought you were going before was just that you're gonna, when Agile's introduced to a company and they decide to go Scrum, you're gonna find resistance, not from everybody, but from some people. Well, then it's time to get curious about that resistance. What is here with this resistance? And often what you'll find is there's something about the way things are being done that's stepping on the toes of that person's values, right? So what is pushing up against what they know to be true and what's important to them that's causing them to dig in their heels? And if we can be curious about that, rather than, no, you have to do it this way, I think it opens up a conversation and perspectives.
But I also observed sometimes the upper management, they don't really believe in Scrum, but they want to push the Scrum because that will look good with the customers and that will help them get other projects. So they don't generally believe in that one, but they'll try to push it. If you don't believe it, then you push it, then
And Manjeet Singh, who gave the last meetup or 2 weeks ago, he said it's because Agile is the Baywatch of of business value right now. Right, it's the sexy new thing, right? And so that's when management becomes a barrier to full implementation of Agile, right? Or a change in Agile mindset.
But here's one thing, to resolve these kind of problems, your Scrum Master has to be really strong and not a taskmaster. Because in one of my projects, it happened wherein the client manager started coming to us and saying, who in your team did that user story? Our Scrum Master's response to that was, well, team is atomic unit. It was the team that did the story and not that particular individual.
Yeah.
Team takes the entire fall for it if something went wrong. That's when you build trust amongst team members, and that team grows and becomes very productive.
That's fantastic to hear.
Right, yeah, and then that's, I want to draw it back to Lisa's thing. So I actually, on purpose, did not want to see the gorillas. And what I mean by that is, as a federal employee, government project manager, I said I only want to hear negative things from the Scrum Master. And they may have been Perry speaking for Perry, or maybe Perry speaking for somebody else. I don't want to know that. Anytime you have something that you want to push up the chain, we're going to keep it safe. The team needs to stay internal, and that way they're protected, so to speak.
So your Scrum Master is the representative of whatever negative whatever
Feedback.
Yeah.
And I said, because I'm not perfect, and I want to, well, and I guess in a way, because I want to know what my gorillas are, right? So Perry can tell me, but if there's any feedback of how I can improve, anything I'm failing on, I want to know how I'm failing. I don't want that to stay underneath a carpet.
So
I want that.
So I'm curious, like you said, the same thing on our projects. On a story level, we don't assign to a developer, we assign to the product owner name. So that, it's not like, hey, this is your story, right?
Oh,
so
that's
task
great.
level, we assign who is what.
That's cool. That's cool. I like
That
that.
visibility in that way is.
What were you saying about?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
10 more minutes.
we're a little.
Well, we're in the Q&A period.
We're in the Q&A.
I was curious.
I just want to say one thing before the conversation continues. I, first of all, thank you very much for having me, but I hope that the one thing you got out of this presentation is that knowledge and awareness is always partial. And so the best we can do is continue to ask questions.
Thank you. That was
I